Okay, hi everyone. This is Kat from Canada, and she will be talking about gender in hackerspaces, and I hope you'll have a very interesting, we'll have a very interesting talk and discussion afterwards.
Thanks. All right, how are you all doing today? Good. Thanks for the thumbs up. That's awesome. So yeah, I'm Kat Braybrook. I'm gonna force you guys to watch my slideshow, which has lots of really ridiculous internet images on it instead of regular images, because I don't know, I like weird slideshows. So basically, my background is that I'm finishing a Master's of Science right now in digital anthropology at UCL, University College London, in London, UK. And I'm also community coordinator for the OKFN. We're all here today because they're awesome and came to support me. And right there. And basically we support open knowledge, open access, and open data community projects as well, and coding projects. So basically, my main point here is I should probably say first where I'm coming from. This is one of my favorite internet images because it looks like it's from the movie Hackers from the 1990s, which I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's epic, basically. Very non-illustrative of what regular hackers are like, but awesome. So I've always kind of thought of myself as a bit of a geek my whole life. I grew up reading sci-fi, and my dad had every single episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation filmed and cataloged on tape in his library. And when I was a teenager, I saw Hackers, the movie, and I think that really sort of awakened this latent desire in me to find the bizarre and odd in the internet. And ever since then, I've just been ultra weird, and my brain has been half virtual, I think, since that point. But what I've also always been really inspired by is things like Adbusters that are more culture jamming and activism-focused publications and projects. So kind of when you combine those two, like the nerd and the sort of activist and political scientist in me, that's kind of how I got really into hackers and started to really admire a lot of the work they were doing. But then when I became older and became an academic, you'll notice I'm not a traditional academic at all, obviously, but the reason I decided to do a master's in this stuff is mostly because I read this study. It was a 2001 study done by Ghosh and a bunch of other people, and it said that in FLOSS subcultures, so free, Libre, open source software, only 1.5% of those communities were female. And there was another study in 2006 by a bunch of people, Krieger, Leach, a bunch of other dudes, which sort of augmented this first piece and looked at potential causes. And one of the main causes that they found was that a lot of women felt discriminated against and experienced overt sexism in these spaces. And I kind of felt, as a younger woman from a different generation, I'm millennial, so I'm 25, I engaged with the internet in a very different time and space than a lot of the women in these original studies. And as a result, I wanted to talk to other women of my age and see if their experiences have been different as coders and as hackers than the experiences of these earlier women. I sensed that they would be different, because for me, things have been very different. I've never experienced overt sexism in any of the techie-focused spaces I've been in. But I really wanted to hear from the mouths of other females what they thought. So, before I get into what I did as far as research, I kind of feel like I need to make some disclaimers as far as semantics, because this, as you know, the word hacker gets misappropriated so often in the public, and unfortunately by many researchers. So I'm going to give you my definitions just so that we're all on the same page and you don't think I'm calling hackers something that they're not. So essentially in my writing, I'm going to be using the terms hacker, coder, and geek interchangeably. And that's because my informants use those words interchangeably to describe themselves and to self-actualize their experiences. Some of them prefer to be called a coder only, some prefer geek, they see that as being a better umbrella term, and some are very strong in the sense that they feel they are hackers. And when I think of floss women, and the women that I've been speaking to, and men as well, I was trying to think of what they have in common, despite their diverse ways of engaging with this sort of idea of virtual code and hacking. And I think really the main common definition I can come up with is that as a group, they're first of all about floss, whether that's open software or open source. They're about the idea of open access and open knowledge. But they're also really about building rather than cracking, which is sort of what people assume a hacker is. It's just a cracker, right? So to them, that they do this in various ways, whether it's through reclaiming ownership, through the manipulation of technologies, or through unanticipated use of those technologies. I like to use Richard Stallman's words. I find that fitting somehow. He sort of says that he believes this space is about exploring the limits of what is possible in a spirit of playful cleverness. And I also really like the motto of the DIY magazine Make, where they say, if you can't open it, you don't own it. And that's a phrase that has been repeated by many of the people I've spoken to, which I think is really fascinating as far as finding personal agency through the technologies or hardware hacks or software projects that you're involved with. Also, Chris Kelty is another person that I really love to mention. He wrote this book called 2 Bits, The Cultural Significance of Free Software, where he said that for him, he uses the word geek instead of hacker because he feels it's a better way to describe a very diverse group of people that engage here. And he says that he thinks geeks are themselves bound together as a recursive public. So they share a common idea about how the internet should be structured, and together they are the builders and imaginers of virtual spaces that maybe people like me who aren't hackers or coders can't even imagine yet. And in a way, when I get really philosophical about this kind of work really reminds me of the old Hegelian idea of sublation, which I'm sure many of you know of because it comes from the German word, which I'm going to butcher really badly, aufheben. So the idea that a thing can be rearranged. Thanks. So the idea of something being rearranged through a transformative process that's based on a dialectic between old and new, instead of just being merely deconstructed in a static sort of relationship. And to me, this is just my interpretation, but I feel like that's what hackers and coders today are really about. So, next slide. Yes, of course, I need to, sound somewhat academic eventually, and so I'm just going to give you a laundry list of some of the theories I'm working with, just so you know where I'm coming from as far as context. And really what I like to read is non-traditional, weird, innovative, really immersive pieces by academics. I think those are the pieces I find most inspiring myself as an academic who's younger. So my main inspirations are people like Donna Haraway with the Cyborg Manifesto, Amber Case, Kathleen Richardson, who do cyborg anthropology, who have spoken a lot about that lately in the public, Judith Butler, who does stuff about gender construction, Gabriella Coleman, who's in the audience today, I'm pretty excited about that. She does a lot of stuff about virtual anthropologies of hacker cultures. Tom Bullisdorf and Julian Dibble, who've done some really cool immersive ethnographies of virtual spaces and MMORGs where they themselves are participants in these worlds and get really heavily engaged within them. I'm also really excited by Alison Powell's work at LSE. She does a lot of stuff around hardware hacking ethics. And Daniel Miller and my supervisor, Lane DeNicola at UCL in my program, Digital Anthropology. Because right now they're really working to merge material culture theory with HCI and digital culture theory and anthropology. And then when I get more into philosophy, I'm into the ideas of Bruno Latour, for sure, where he gets into dialectics between culture, technology, and science, and also self-defined hackers who are actually in the field, like Otto von Busch. He actually calls himself a fashion hacker, but think that's a contestable term, but he writes a lot about hacktivism and culture jamming in real life situations. And then Chris Kelty, Lawrence Lessig, people who have done things like Creative Commons. So that part's over, thank God. But now I feel like I should also justify why I've chosen to study hackers and coders within anthropology instead of maybe media studies or psychology or communications. And really, I think for me, it's because of how immersive it can be. So I'm going to quote Tom Bolastar because I find him interesting in that he's been very immersive himself in his work and in the people he studies. He wrote a book called Coming of Age in Second Life, which basically he says that he feels anthropology has been virtual before the internet itself even existed. He says to imagine oneself in a new place or culture and to be virtually there, to imagine that, has always been about avatarizing the self. And that's kind of how I see my experience as an anthropologist, is, you know, in a way, both physically and hypothetically trying to exist as an avatar, but also as a person that's both friend and equal to the people I'm talking about. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of being a collaborator instead of being a researcher and, you know, the subject is a really important thing to cross over into, especially with, you know, ethnographies of places like the internet or of people engaging with virtual spaces, because the spaces that we are all engaging with here are so decentralized and so community focused that I feel like these old dichotomies no longer stand, and they shouldn't. So, the research itself, essentially I've been doing an ethnography from April 2011 until now. This is one of the last times that I'm actively going to call myself an anthropologist and write anything down, you know, to be used in my thesis. But pretty much I've been in London a lot and Berlin a lot as far as like IRL physicality. But I've also been engaging with a lot of other cities across Europe through Twitter, email, IRC chats, message boards, etc. Which is why I've made this thing about more of a pan-European view than just London or just Berlin. And I've spoken to 30 informants. 11 of those have been in-depth interpersonal relationships where we've hung out in real life, and I would call them friends of mine and colleagues. And the rest were fully virtual because I lived in cities I couldn't access physically. So for the virtual ones, I sent out lengthy question sets, as a few of them are here today and I'm sure have complaints about that. And we also we chatted on IRC and through Twitter and various mediums, as we all do. We have many mediums we speak within. But the in-person ones, basically, it's a lot of conversations over drinks, following them to events, to hackathons, to their hack spaces, to media labs, you know, to conferences. So that includes Chaos Computer Club, who've just been really amazing and supportive of my work. And also I've hung out at places like Open Tech and Republica in Berlin, and the Open Knowledge Foundation's conference, which just happened in Berlin a month ago. Spoke to a lot of awesome coders there, and also at regional meetups like Hacks and Hackers in London, which brings together a group of journalists with a group of self-professed hackers or coders, and has them play off each other and debate issues and figure out ways they can potentially collaborate. It often doesn't work out well, but always interesting discussions. Yeah, I've also gone to Geekbot and more geek-focused events that are not just hackers, but also people that do engage with other forms of media, like interactive designers and more academic-based things. Yeah, and like my informants have been from a variety of worlds themselves, from Mozilla, from GNOME, from My Society, spoken to black hat, white hat, gray hat hackers, security hackers, hacktivists, Linux chicks, women, electric tech carnival people, gender changers. Yeah, a bunch of different groups have been represented. And about half of the informants have decided they'd like to be anonymous due to the work they're doing, and the other half are fine with me sharing their name. What else? Yeah, so as far as like meeting these people, I mostly just did it through word of mouth. Because I'm from Vancouver, I've only been in London for a year now. I was totally like a babe in the woods, and I did not know where to start meeting people, so I just started calling out on Twitter and saying I needed help and I needed awesome lady coders to meet. Originally, I only wanted to meet with women who are of millennial age, so age 20 to 32 was my cutoff. I didn't want to speak to men, and it was a very strict term, a very strict group of people to study, as I found later. But even with that strict demographic, I got really lucky because a lot of colleagues started sending my, my thesis abstract to a bunch of different mailing lists. So Linux Chick, Gender Chargers, Electrotech Carnival, Chaos Camp, different hack spaces. And through that, I just got an outflow of people who just had really amazing things to say, really supportive ideas, sent me literature, sent me contacts, and I, in the end, had way too many informants, and I had to cut off the people I spoke to, which, I mean, that just shows how many people would like to be talking about gender in these spaces and would like to be talking about how to engage women in technology. And I feel like as one person, I'm not even enough to conceptualize all these different opinions and ideas. So, I mean, in a way, it's exciting that this topic is so salient right now, that men and women are interested in hearing about it. Like, even all of you here today, it's exciting to see that this many people even think this is a salient issue right now. I think it's a key moment. So what I was especially interested in observing in my informants was people's experiences of gender in their places, and how did they characterize contemporary understandings of geek cultures versus generations before them, like those in the Ghosh study. Did they think that something had changed? Am I just crazy and I'm the only one that thought something had changed? And essentially, in my research, halfway through, I found that I was wrong in only deciding I wanted to speak to millennial-aged women about gender. I realized that for women, especially of millennial generations under 30, often the people that they wanted me to speak to, that they suggested to me, were men. And men who are older, women who are older, women who are younger, who were just hitting their teens. And I kind of realized through this that we're all really involved in gender play and in speaking about gender. And it's almost silly to just talk to one tiny demographic within that massive conversation that seems to never end. So halfway through, I started talking to men and to older women, and I think it really enriched my results to do so. So, on to my results. This photo is of one of the first female robots that's supposed to be humanoid out of Japan. And I like sharing it because it's really creepy, I think. But yeah, I guess when I'm still in the process of writing my thesis. I'm supposed to submit it in a month, and I'm freaking out. But essentially, so far, I've found 3 things that seem to be key points in the answers of all these different people from diverse backgrounds, genders, ages, everything. First of all, as I just said, I think when we talk about women in hack spaces and media labs and coder cultures, what we really need to do is talk about everyone, because we are all affected by gender play and by the genders that have been constructed for us and the societies we exist within, where we define ourselves based on our genders. And I think of Donna Haraway in the Cyborg Manifesto when I talk about this. One of my favorite quotes by her is, "Why should our bodies end at the skin, or include at best other beings encapsulated by skin?" And at that sense, why should gender? I mean, I think at the risk of sounding overly post-structural, which I know is annoying, I think we really need to be ultra flexible as researchers when engaging with worlds that are both virtual and physical, because those worlds themselves are like always changing, and I think our constructions of gender are as well. Also, I think that the second thing I found is that things to me have indeed changed since that 2001 study. And for my informants, I think they would agree with me for the most part that in a decade, the way that women engage with these spaces and the way women are received has definitely changed. And I think we would all agree for the better. Even when you think of this camp, I know that there's way more women here this year than there was 4 years ago. And I think in a way that's exciting. That means these communities are opening up, they're becoming more inclusive, and maybe women are feeling more welcome than they might have 10 years ago. Hypothesis, but I think despite this trend being something I can assert, I would still say that the most mentioned problem for all of my informants was a sense of loneliness as women, and a sense from the men that their female friends seemed to feel lonely, as the only women often engaging in many of these smaller groups. I think every woman I spoke to has had a negative experience where she felt isolated or lonely in those spaces due to her gender, and not due to the fault of any of the men around her, but more due to her being conscious of her place and who she was in that space, and how it's kind of hard to escape that sometimes. A lot of women have talked about a sense of needing to prove oneself when joining with these groups, especially with coding groups. Initially, one of my informants, who's 33 right now, told me that she still feels, even though she works for a major tech company right now, a well-respected company, she still feels that everyone in her life thinks she is an idiot with computers, including her own husband. And she was basically like, I can't prove to him enough how much I care about code and how much I even know. She says it's almost mythical, the sense that she is well positioned in these worlds. Another says that she feels she always has to be a stand-in for the female gender as a whole. She says, when I get into a dick fight over technical competence, I am never able to do so merely as an individual. I must do it as a prototype. I thought that was a really interesting point to make, that we often, even when we feel alone in these spaces, we still feel we have to represent something bigger instead of just engaging as individuals with other individuals. A lot of women feel their gender is almost pushing down on them in a way that they themselves wouldn't like. Others explained to me that they felt really isolated in their worlds and in their work, that they can't talk about it at all with their core female friends even. One said her friends would rather gossip than speak about her work, and that when she tries to speak about it, she feels like she's talking about a secret life. She does highly complex work in security software, and she said that when her friends are at parties and they describe what she does, they say to their mutual friends, "So you hack banks, right?" Instead of really asking what she's up to as a coder. And both male and female informants have often told me that many of their best experiences as coders have been at conference and hackathons like this one. One male informant told me that events like this, like Chaos Camp, they charge his inner battery for months afterwards, and they leave him feeling rejuvenated and inspired in a way that his daily work does not as a coder. However, I think even at these events, we can all say that women are still underrepresented, despite the fact that our numbers are rising. And I think Philip Boll, who he's one of the head people at the GNOME Women's Internship, he described it to me as a conspicuous absence. And he said that it bothers him when he's at conferences and there's very few women involved. Okay. So, essentially, the last thing I would say is that I don't think there is an answer to this issue. I think we can all agree that it's an issue, that there's not many women involved, but I don't have an answer. I don't think I should. I think the answers are very complex, and they depend on the person and the space we're engaging with and the demographic of the group that is being involved. But I think if we can all agree here that the female mind, at its root, has no less aptitude for machine-based understanding than a man's, and I hope we can all agree on that here, since we're all here. I think we'll still all argue about how to promote more female participation. All of the conversations I've had at this camp have been really enriching and intense, actually. I feel like men and women, all of us have different opinions on what should be done. We could argue about it for hours. So for some of my informants, at Rainy Cat, who's a hardware hacker in London, she does fashion-based hacking with Arduinos. She said that it was meeting her first Arduino that really changed things for her, and she says until she saw this Arduino, she always thought machines were hard, cold, boring. She always saw them as male, and for her, it was maybe making the machine a bit more gendered that changed her perception of machine learning itself. But for other women, since they've been young, they've been engaged with these spaces through siblings, through parents, through programming old computers in the 80s, when they first came out. And I think also, like an interesting point is that very few people have said that school inspired them. Often by the time they got to university, they'd already been inspired and they went into computer science, but not one woman said that high school sort of awakened that first passion for technology within her. One woman said that secondary school in the UK did, but she said she felt it was only because she went to an all-female school, and that therefore she was at the top of her class amongst other females where they sort of collaboratively learned that knowledge. So I mean, I think there might be something to be said for a lack of inspiration in high schools for women. I don't know how that could be changed. I don't think that necessarily women-only spaces are the right answer, but there's definitely something wrong if our primary and high schools aren't engaging women in the same way they're engaging men with technology. So this is pretty much all that I wanted to say about this. I didn't really want this to just be about myself. Mostly, I'm really intrigued what you guys have to say. So what I'm going to do is force you guys to do something right now, which is kind of annoying, but I think it'll be interesting. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up right now. You won't have to move, just stand. Thanks. It's hard when you're on your computer, I know. Okay, everyone standing? Thank you. So, I have 4 things that I'm going to say, and what I want you to do is, if you've had first-hand experience with any of the things I'm about to describe, I just want you to sit down. Make sense? All right, so 1, if you've ever felt explicit or implicit sexism about your gender when engaging with technology, male or female, bigendered, whether it's at a conference, at a hack space, at a workplace, even in your home, if you felt explicit or even implicit, non-obvious sexism. Take a seat. Okay, number 2. If you've ever felt uncomfortable or nervous engaging at a recursive, geek, cultural, tech type of space because of your gender, male or female. If you've ever walked into a room and felt you're the only one of your gender and it's awkward for you, take a seat. Okay. You want me to say it again? Okay. Sure. If you've ever felt uncomfortable or nervous engaging with a tech or geek space because of your gender. If you've ever walked into a room and just felt really awkward because you're maybe the only one of your gender in that room, then take a seat. All right, 3, if you've ever made an effort to hide your gender online, whether it's at chat rooms, message boards, 4chan, MUDs, virtual worlds, if you've either hidden your gender or changed your gender, specifically online, sit down. Okay, and 4th, if you've ever called yourself a feminist when talking to other tech people, geeks, nerds, whatever, if you've ever, male or female, referred to yourself as a feminist, sit down. Thank you. So what I'd be interested in now is for those who are still standing, now I'm opening up to you. I don't want to speak anymore. I think I've said enough. I would really be interested to understand why, in your experience, you feel that you've never had any of these feelings. And I mean, I think it's an interesting discussion, but I think like the main point that I was trying to make by us doing this exercise is that I think the majority of us have engaged in gender play as geeks or as coders or as hackers, whether we know it or not. And I think the majority of us have been critical of our engagements with gender and others' engagements with gender. And I think the majority of us have kind of acknowledged how complex that engagement can be and how different it is, I think, for each person, but how at the same point we've all engaged with it. So yeah, I mean, I guess I am really intrigued for those who are still standing at the end. Why would you say that you feel your experience has been less gender-focused or gendered than the experiences of others? I mean, or if you even have criticisms about any of the statements I just made, I would be really interested to hear them right now. So I'd like to open it up to you guys.
Yeah, please go to the mic in the middle.
Hi. I'm not completely positive because I haven't given a lot of thought about it, but it could be the set of expectations that I have when I go to someplace. I guess when I'm going to a conference, whether I'm participating as just going and enjoying it or going to participate and share my own knowledge, I'm not seeing who is saying the idea. Like, I forget names very, very quickly. Almost immediately when I meet someone, I just don't keep track of their name. But what I do remember is what they said. And when people are like, oh, where's that? Well, talk to the person who really likes apple pie, I think. Like I only construct the image of a person based on what they're saying. So I think in that respect, maybe I'm not reading as much body language that is indicating some sort of preference to listen to one gender on a topic, whether it's authoritative or not, or another gender. Maybe it's I'm just missing that, but yeah, I just don't expect there to be any difference between at least physical difference, like wherever the thoughts are coming from is what the most important thing is. And that's why face-to-face or online, I don't see it as much different discussion. But that's from, I'm sure I could spend days thinking more about how other ways that it hasn't affected me.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting. Hi.
Hi, my name is Far. I've been on the periphery of the NIM Wars, which has been going around for a week or two. For those that maybe have not heard about it, Google Plus forces you to use your real name, and only exactly your real name, and there's a lot of wonky stuff going around. I'm just wondering, in your research and your professional opinion, does using a pseudonym or anonymity change a lot of these dynamics? Does it alter people's expectations or how much pressure they feel to live up to certain stereotypes?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can only speak for the informants I've spoken to and not for the experience of all women or men for that matter. But I think for those I've spoken to, when they are online just dealing with code, with other people who are dealing with code, they have felt post-gendered. And for a lot of them, it has felt empowering to not be judged first and foremost based on their gender, but rather their aptitude with the code. And they find that both simplifies things and for them is maybe an empowering experience. I haven't really spoken to anyone who's said that that experience is disempowering to be, in a way, post-gender online. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, and that's where I need to read more to understand the possible ramifications or possibilities there. But I definitely think that in the last 10 years, it's become more and more easy for us to engage anonymously online, and therefore it's allowed many of us to disengage from our gender by engaging with anonymous spaces. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Hi.
I made some very interesting experience when I do my STEM presentations. Was? Funktioniert oder was? Ich nehm's not. Okay, so I made some very interesting experiences when I give my STEM presentations. I do them before mixed classes, and I do them before, and I once did them before female class only. And what I realized is that when I asked the guys or the audience to play with my moon rovers, then the girls are always, standing shy and don't dare to do anything, and I kind of have to say, hey, come on, you get you over here and play with it. And then I once did this presentation with just females only, and it was very exciting because it was the same as the guys when we do mixed presentations. They just came to me and they wanted to play with the moon rover as well. And this is just something that I realized that, when they may get, I don't know, they don't allow themselves to show that they are interested as well when there are guys around. So What I would be interested in is, what do you think would be the best idea to approach those young students that I sometimes have in STEM presentations, for example?
So what would be the best way to approach women?
Yeah, exactly. To encourage them to,
Encourage.
do stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had interesting discussions here, especially with other women who are very tech-focused themselves and who have been, empowered in these spaces for a while, those spaces being mostly male. And a lot of those women have said that for themselves, they don't like to be treated differently. They like to be post-gender, and for them, that's how they've always engaged as coders, is that they get annoyed when men treat them differently because, oh, there's a woman in the room, now I have to speak differently. But each of these women said that that's not how it is for all women, and that I think we just need to be seen as individuals like every man. Some men are shy, some men are not. Some people need a bit more encouragement and some don't. So I think for anyone who seems like they're a bit shy and off the side of like the circle, just engaging with them as an individual, maybe not as female or male, and asking them how they would like to get involved themselves, I think is the most empowering way to start with that, because everyone wants to get involved in a different way, So yeah, I think the more friendly you are as the male in that engagement, the better, and the more you treat them like an equal from the beginning, the better. But yeah, I think it really depends on the person, and I think that's all I've found really, is that it really depends on the individual with all of these experiences of gender.
Or another question: if you want to encourage, females, what would be the most interesting angle for them to show off that computer science stuff? Show off the creativity, the social part in it, or show the hard tech stuff like lasers.
I think it would be hard to answer without generalizing, once again, women's experiences or their needs, but I think we all kind of enjoy when we can collaborate, and that's maybe why we've come out in the beginning. It's because we want to share with others and collaborate, so maybe engaging in processes that involve women engaging as equals with men, whether it's creating a presentation or doing a collaborative hack together where different skill levels and skill sets can be indulged, I think it's probably the best way to go about it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
It's getting a little bit noisy in here, so please, if you want to have a private conversation, take it outside quietly. If you want to join our conversation, please queue up at the microphone.
Hi. So I was not one of the person standing up, but I wanted to answer a bit to the first intervention of the question of going to an event to look at the content. And I really understand this interest, but I think I don't know if it's as a feminist or for which reason, but I also became interested in the process and structures. And I think one of the reason, one of the ways to look at the imbalance between women and men may be more regard as a process question. And I think this is very linked to the idea that we are talking of open process or open technology. If they are open, if we look also at the process, the question could be why some people are not contributing. Mm-hmm. And for me, feminism is a kind of looking at society as a way. You could look at sexism as a kind of racism, mm-hmm. and if you look at the result, you won't see what is happening. But I have the feeling that what we are talking here is not only a question of typical sexism, but I think it's more looking at what are the kind of process in between us and in between the larger society, which is possibly excluding women or something like this.
Yeah. So I guess what are some example ways that you personally feel women have been excluded in these spaces?
But for example, I think the question of looking at representation is a very weird way, because it quite quickly makes me think of how black people or indigenous people will be brought into a media scene or a political party just to show, well, like, okay, we have all these people. But I think it's not a question of representation, it's a question of who is doing what and who is taking part to the organization, for example, to the thinking of the general process. And it's another question is how newbies or women are involved in learning, and sometimes just because of the fact we say that technologies are open, we are not thinking of the social process to make it more available. Mm-hmm. So that could be another kind of sexism, which is not direct, but just a way to say, well, you don't know how to do it, learn it yourself, instead of trying to be more welcoming.
Yeah.
I think something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you.
Hi, I was one of the people that stayed standing, and the reason is because I limited my own responses to my workplace. And the reason I was staying standing is because I work for a company that was founded by a woman geek. And so, just as another point of reference, that there are women that can prove themselves and grow a company from nothing to it's a very large company in the industry it's in. And in that company, obviously, I don't see any type of sexism either way. There are men and women in leading positions. One of our major customer, when they came on board, their main Unix sysadmin that was assigned to them was a woman. And so there are maybe exceptions. It is in the US, by the way, so I don't know if it applies to Europe as well. But there are places like that. Outside of my workplace, I would have said the first question because I've seen very harsh discrimination, and I have to say, especially from Europe for some reason, I don't know why that seems to be. But
Do you have an example of like an instance where you can remember that occurring?
Of that occurring? Yes, so it's about healthcare industry in I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I don't want to bring real names and people, but it's an industry that's trying to computerize the information within the industry, and so they're trying to get standard way of doing things, bring international standards in, and so that person, a woman, spent tons of time building the foundations of what needs to be done and wrote papers, etc. And once that's done and it was everybody agree, oh, that's all fine, now you go away and we'll assign all the men to go travel and present the work that you did. So that is an example that I've seen.
Thank you.
Hi, I want to make you a question. I want to know what's your opinion about what makes a person a geek? Not what is it a geek, but when I was little, I knew I was different from other girls. I prefer to read science fiction instead of playing with them because they were boring and. And I feel weird, I feel different, and I felt alone. But I was the only geek in my class, and there wasn't male geeks neither. And later, with the years, some of that people started develop interest for these kind of things. But I don't know. You think a geek it's made? Or you develop that, and you think we are less female geeks because of the culture, or because we really, if a geek is born, if a geek really think that way and like that things because he is like that, maybe it's normal that there are less female geeks, but or it's really the culture.
That's an interesting question, and I think that's one that I mean, I would say every anthropologist probably would disagree on and have a different answer for. But I mean, I think for myself only, I personally have seen that many of our aptitudes have been socially constructed and socialized in many ways that, I mean, I think things can go scarily essentialist if we say that women have less aptitude or are less interested in machines or in technology or in geek-based ideas than men. I think so much of it is what has been supported, like what kind of activities have been supported in us since we were young, you know, and what kind of ways we've felt empowered and engaged, what communities we've tapped into throughout our lives where we felt the most welcome. I think some people, you know, some people say they're naturally better at math than others. Some have natural gifts. But I think as far as something that we have a passion for, that's very different, and that's very much based on whether that passion has been both instilled in us and supported within us. You know, like I'm not good at programming. I'm a web designer, but I would say I have a passion for hardware hacking. And I am drawn to it, and I go to classes for it, and I'm really excited by that world. And it's not because I'm good at it. I have no aptitude, really. It's just because I felt from the beginning very empowered in that world and very excited by it, and it felt welcoming. So I think a lot of the reasons we engage as geeks and decide to self-actualize ourselves that way is more based on our culture and our sociality rather than natural aptitude. But I would say that's just an opinion I have, and I think there's many who would disagree with me on that point. But yeah, thank you for your insight. That's really interesting.
Cell phone, can you? Yeah, sorry. You have 15 minutes left.
Okay. Hi.
Hey, first of all, I guess I would call myself a feminist, and interestingly enough, when you're a guy and you're sometimes the only feminist in the room, you become the only one, and then it reverses the whole gender thing because you're the one guy who's not being manly enough or something. That being said, this talk reminded me of something. A while back, I was reading about how USB 3 support was first came in like the Linux kernel. So I was like, yay, Linux gets it first. And then I saw, a girl did it, and I was really happy. I thought, this is really cool. And then I caught myself and thought, well, no, I shouldn't care that it's a girl. How does it matter? And at the same time, I thought, well, no, it is cool that it's a girl because it gives more power to the idea that, well, look, girls can do it too. So it left me feeling conflicted. How should I feel about it? Should I feel proud that it's a girl and that's great? Or should I just not care because the point at the end of the day is that who cares if it's a guy or girl who did it? So that's how it made me feel. So
Yeah, I think it's really hard for a lot of men who self-actualize or who are, you know, brave enough maybe to say that they are feminists. I think it's a really difficult engagement with other men, and it's really easy to maybe be mocked or to get into like serious arguments about it as a man from what I've heard. And I think even by going to talks like this and being there and supporting your female colleagues by just caring in these kinds of dialogues is really important as a man, and I commend you for being here. I mean, I commend everyone for being here, for even listening to this kind of talk. I think that's really, it's really important and exciting to see just as many men as women who are interested in talking about gender and maybe how to bring more women into these spaces. And I think with my informants, I've found all the men I've spoken to about this research to be just as interested as women. And I think that, I don't know if that's something that's changed in the last 10 years, if maybe men were less interested 10 years ago or less maybe empowered to speak about gender, but I've definitely seen a significant portion of men who care about this, and I think that's great. Yeah, thank you.
It's quite a minor point, but I thought it was one worth making nonetheless. Earlier in your speech, you mentioned that you didn't think secondary schools were engaging women in this. Sorry, is that better? You mentioned earlier in your speech that in secondary schools you didn't think women were being engaged in the same way as men in technology. Just as an anecdotal point, amongst me and my male friends, I think that we had the same experience. So our interest in the area came entirely from outside of the school arena. And I can't think of anyone I know personally, this is anecdotally obviously, I can't think of anyone I know personally that was influenced into that through school, male or female.
Right. So would you say that it's almost better to get this kind of feel this kind of passion outside of school, like more as a recursive subculture in a way?
Well, from my experience, that's probably the only way that it seems to happen.
Yeah.
Other people may have different experiences of learning that at school, but I haven't.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
I was. When I first came to this space, I've got to admit I was expecting it to be a lot more difficult than it was. And it's interesting that the earlier studies did show that that was an experience people felt they had. I was wondering whether there were studies in Europe or North America and whether there's any difference still in the hacker subcultures, or is it, this much like it is everywhere, that it's quite welcoming. But still, when I tell people I've been to an event like this, outside this culture, most people still assume it will have been difficult for me, that those problems are still around.
Right.
So I'm wondering how much of that is a barrier to women entering, that there's still this strong perception of it. The other thing I just wanted to ask was a question. When you talk, I'm not very clear on the anthropological terms, when you talk about a recursive culture or a subculture, what does that mean?
Yeah, I should have defined that. I apologize. My bad. I would just say that myself, as an anthropologist, I try to. So the idea of an ethnography, doing an anthropological ethnography, is that as the researcher, you yourself engage with the spaces that you're studying. So, you're supposed to interview people and hang out at their houses or in their cultures as much as you can, so that you get a full experience of maybe what it might be like to be one of these people in whatever thing you're studying. And therefore you can't speak for them, but you can maybe understand their world and their worldview in a more comprehensive way than perhaps other fields might offer, as far as like the research methodology involved. So when I say that I am into extra immersive ethnographies, I would just identify that as me, myself, in a way becoming a subject along with my subjects by engaging with them as friends and as equals, and also as a woman who's a geek in geek spaces. Therefore, I'm not a total outsider like many anthropologists would be, a full outsider, in these spaces, and themselves would not self-identify within these spaces, whereas I myself, I came to this camp because I really wanted to, I wanted to learn Arduino stuff, so engaging with those spaces, I'm almost writing about myself as well. And I would say that sort of takes the ethnography maybe a step, it makes it a step more personal, in a way that some anthropologists would say is negative, but in a way that I personally think is more positive for a space like this, which is itself so community focused and immersive for the people involved. I feel like I couldn't just engage with a conference or a tech event as an outsider. I'd really want to participate to understand what that's like myself, Yeah, but thank you. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for your research. It's really awesome.
Thank you.
So, on discussions about imbalance, I've always wanted to say this into a microphone. I blame capitalism. Because it's not just in coding and geek spheres that we see imbalance, right? In a lot of different spheres, we see an imbalance in one direction, whether it's ecological or when it comes to people in these hacker spaces. So if we accept or consider that it might be a structural issue, one to do with the conditions we've grown up and the way that we relate to one another, maybe therein lies some of the answers. Like, it's not going to be an overhaul change. We rioted in London or whatever. Things aren't going to change straight away. Like, it being a relationship requires that these conversations keep happening. But it's definitely there. I work at a bike workshop, and we have 2 female technicians there. And oftentimes kids come in and they walk straight past the female technicians to whatever male's around. You could be just walking past, and they'll go straight to the male and be like, "Oh, I've got this problem, how can we fix it?" And I asked them what's something we could do in this instance. And she was like, to be honest, you could just turn around and ask us, ask us what we think about the problem. Because we grow up in a society where it's often, the go-to person is a man. And by turning around in each and every conversation or opportunity and turning to another person, female or male, but not having that barrier is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if it's a structural problem, it's conversation by conversation. We just need to change our behavior. And we have to accept that we're sexist. We've grown up in a sexist society, right? We're not free of society. Therefore, I've got these sexist overtones. It's not an individual problem we have, it's a structural one. I'm reading a book called The Delusion of Gender, and there's a story of a woman coder who went through a lot of the problems that you're talking about, and she went through a sex change. And the next week, comments by co-workers went something along the line of, geez, that woman's brother's way better, his code's way better, nothing had changed other than like the physical appearance. So sorry for rambling, but I think the conversations that we're having are really good, and it's going to come like a step at a time. It's not like you riot and then suddenly you live in utopia. So first and foremost, we have to agree that it's important that we have the equality.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think a lot of the answers here are comprehensive and very complex in the various ways that these things need to be addressed. Much like the London riots, there isn't one answer or one thing that's going to change out of them. And I think in a way you're right to mention capitalism as something that is both insidious and affects us at every level of our culture and our understandings of culture. We can't escape what we've been raised within, but I think, as you said, just by engaging in minuscule conversations with others, we're making progress each time. Like each time we talk to someone about gender or about the London riots or whatever, I think for myself, I always feel a bit more excited and empowered, and I feel like the world is changing in front of me with each conversation I have. So I think to me that's one of the main ways we can feel empowered and feel agency as people engaging in this world that is changing very rapidly, as we all know. So thank you. It's really interesting. Hi. 5 minutes left.
Okay. I just wanted to note that I've observed that my presence in male-dominated spaces will usually cause resentment because, they feel observed, they feel they can't be themselves, they can't make the same jokes, they can't say, oh, she's got a nice ass or something like that, So they become not necessarily aggressive, but they just resent my presence because they feel, in German, it's called unfrei. You're not free to be yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that's a key thing that so many women have said, that it's not the fault of any of the people around them, but they do feel like the men in their life feel they need to act differently just because there's a woman in the room. And I think that's difficult. That means that you are made conscious of your gender as soon as you walk into that room, whether you want to or not. Even if, like as I think you're saying, even if you wouldn't be offended by certain jokes or whatever, you end up feeling like you're representing all women, just because you happen to look female. And I mean, I can't even count how many times I wish I could just hide my face sometimes when I walk into a room so I don't look like a woman, because it does change people's dealings with me sometimes, and I would not blame anyone for that, but I think once again it's how we're raised, it's systemic, and people are trying to be polite, but in certain cases it does kind of make us feel a bit alienated. And I guess I feel like I've had discussions here also where guys will say, how do I get more women involved in like this thing we're hacking right now? And I would always say, just treat them like they're one of you, Don't treat them like they're different, like they're these singular creatures. Just treat them like an equal, and then I think we'll all feel more welcomed. Yeah, thank you. Hi, last question or comment?
Well, what I would like to know is, given the fact that over the years the proportion of women on this kind of events has risen, I would be very interested what factors we can change, where are we able to do something, because for example what she said earlier, but I personally do not feel concerned, because I would if it was really the general discussion, I wouldn't refrain from saying whatever I would like to, whether a girl is in the room or not. But it is not really something I can change, because she perceives it like that. So what I would like to know is, given the fact that there seems to be some kind of progress, I would very much like to know, preferably by the women who have come over the years, what pushed them over the edge, what was the thing that decided them that finally this wasn't such a hostile place and they could feel free to come here, because I'm under the impression that those who are here right now feel generally quite comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that, like, well, it seems like more women are engaging each year, even in tech spaces. I think a lot of people have said that each year they feel like there's more women each time, you know, one or two each time even, or many. But none of us seem to know what the one reason for that is. And I think that's because there isn't just one reason. There isn't one thing that's making women feel welcomed or unwelcomed. I think there's something about a trend in our society right now that is maybe fostering geek culture in general a little bit, and maybe allowing many people who wouldn't self-define as a geek or as a techie or as a hacker or coder or whatever now identify that way. So I mean, this is only my opinion, but I think like that's a trend that's changing in general. I think even Chaos Camp, there's way more people involved this year than there was years before, and I think in every techie subculture I've spoken to, they've all said there are increasingly more people involved, more women, but also more men. So while I think the ratio of women to men is getting a bit higher, I think there's just more people in general getting involved in these spaces, and I don't know, I think it is an interesting dialogue. You disagree? Yeah, go ahead.
I've been coming here for quite some years, and there is very, very clearly a progression. There are new faces coming, and it's not just that there are more attendants in general, but there really are proportionally more girls. And well, it would be definitely interesting to know if there is anything we can do to further that evolution.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only answer I can give you is to ask every female here that you see what she thinks, because I'm not the spokesperson for all women, and I think that every woman is going to give you a different answer for that. But I think that's great, though. I think that's an interesting discussion to start having, and it's one that we should all be having here, and that I think we already are having. How do we get women more engaged? So yeah, I thank you guys so much for being here. This was really amazing, and I'm going to be using some of this insight in my dissertation. So when it's published, I'll share it with you guys. And yeah, thank you. Even this camp has been amazing.